There we go. All right. So yesterday we began to talk about David Duke. We began to talk about how local elections matter. We began to talk about how we need to make sure that we are voting in our local elections because they do matter, because you need to be counted, especially locally, and that there are all kinds of things on your local ballot that should not be ignored. So if you stay home and you don't vote, all of those issues that are on your ballot will be affecting your local neighborhood. And so you can't really go around and complain about what's happening in your community and who has been elected and what kinds of things are not being done in your community or not fixed in your community if you have not gone out to vote. So I know lots of people have all kinds of mixed feelings about this election, and I don't blame you. I think that in many ways we are receiving the judgment of the Lord based on the candidates that we have received, because of all of the candidates that could have been chosen, we have been given, it looks like, two of the seemingly worst candidates to choose from. So I don't consider either one of them to be, anointed of God and all of this other stuff that people are saying, that people are putting on God the Father as if he selected these two people. I think that's a lot of opinion. I think it's a lot of well-wishing. And at the end of the day, if you have not made Jesus Lord of your life, you're going to be in distress either way with either candidate in office. So my encouragement to you is, regardless of who becomes president, make sure Jesus is Lord of your life. All right. So let's jump right into our reading today. We are beginning a new section in Tim's book called Professional Development. Professional Development. Pretty short section today. So let's find out what we can about these issues of class, racism, white supremacy, white privilege, and the whole nine from his perspective. Professional development. We had only been in Houston for a little over 2 weeks when Los Angeles went up in flames. On April 29, 1992, a jury in Simi Valley, California, acquitted 4 white officers who had beaten Rodney King in the aftermath of the now infamous high-speed chase the previous year. As word spread of their acquittal, South Central Los Angeles exploded. With no job, I sat and watched the drama unfold on television by the hour, the story being one of the first to receive virtually 24-hour news coverage for days on end. Images of neighborhoods engulfed in smoke and fire sent shockwaves through the nation. Folks who had enjoyed the luxury of ignoring the rage of the dispossessed were now having to stare it dead in the face, and they were none too happy with what they were seeing. The Black and Latino communities of LA had reached their boiling point, having seen far too much police corruption and brutality go unpunished over the years. And by the mid-90s, even more evidence would emerge about police illegality on an epic scale in the city's Ramparts division. Though most of white America couldn't understand the anger, it was only privilege that allowed such obliviousness. Much was made by commentators and the public of the horrific attack on Reginald Denny, a white truck driver, by 4 black men at the corner of Florence and Normandy Avenues. Denny was pulled from his truck and beaten, a cinder block smashed onto his head in full sight of helicopter cameras, the scene playing out for millions of witnesses during the live coverage. The viciousness of the attackers was to some evidence of black barbarity and criminality. This would be the take of Pat Buchanan, for instance, who would use the riots as a political chit during his presidential bid. Interestingly, and in keeping with the way in which people are so quick to find evidence to suit their pre-existing biases and ignore that which contradicts them, few seem to notice the decency and heroism of the two African American men, Bobby Green Jr. and Reverend Benny Newton, who came to the defense of Denny and another of the mob's victims, Fidel Lopez. While the negative acts of 4 black men were somehow evidence of a larger group flaw, the positive acts of the other 2 black men were taken to mean nothing in the opposite direction. By the time our first month in Houston was done, I was sure I was going to lose my mind. I still couldn't find work, and except for excellent food and a decent nightlife, we would go to the city's dance clubs, mostly because Nicole didn't have to worry about getting hit on, and I could gauge my fashion sense by the extent to which I did. It was tough to find much to like about Harris County. Furthermore, as national events unfolded in which race was clearly implicated, I realized how much I missed working on matters of racial equity and how important the subject matter had become to my understanding, not only of the nation, but also of myself. Then one day in mid-May, I answered the phone call that would, in a number of ways, change my life. On the other end was a producer for a new syndicated television show based in Boston who had been told to contact me about appearing on an upcoming broadcast. She had gotten my number from Lance, who thought I might be perfect for an episode in which the host, Jane Whitney, would have a former Klan family on as guests, as well as a husband and wife who were still active members of the Klan. I would serve as the expert on the white supremacist movement. Initially, she had contacted the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama, to see if someone from the group would appear on the show. But SPLC's policy is never to appear opposite races and thereby give them more credibility than they deserve. Though I understood that logic, I also knew the show was going to proceed, with or without an anti-racist on the panel. Rather than leave it up to the host to know how to respond to the Klan members, I figured it was better to have someone do it who knew something about them. Though I was skittish about the way talk shows typically dealt with these subjects, and with good reason, since it had been only 4 years earlier that the infamous skinhead fight on Geraldo had broken out, during which the host had suffered a broken nose, I decided to do the show. Earlier in the year, while still in New Orleans, I had turned down an offer to appear on Jerry Springer, fearing the circus atmosphere that was already by this point his hallmark. But this time, something about the way in which Laura, the producer, described the episode convinced me it could be a legitimate discussion. I knew something of the ex-Klan family story already, having seen the wife and mother, Jan Ralston, the year before on the Sally Jessy Raphael show. She had first appeared as a proud member of one of the most militant and terroristic Klan factions in the country, the Southern White Knights. Rather than the White Hoods associated for years with the KKK, the Knights preferred battle fatigues and black berets. But after spewing viciously racist diatribes from the stage, and then seeing the tape of the program provided her by the producers, Jan had experienced something of an epiphany. Shocked by her own demeanor, she had called up Sally's producers and asked to return to the program, this time to denounce the Klan and announce her decision to leave the organization. By the time of the Jane Whitney appearance, Jan had convinced her husband Gary and 2 of their children to leave the Klan as well. They would be the primary focus of the show, opposite Ken and Carol Peterson, a Klan couple from Wisconsin. When Laura explained that the Petersons would appear by satellite rather than live in the studio because Ken was afraid to fly, I was convinced that my role in the program could be constructive. There was no chance that the show would descend into chair-throwing chaos with the unrepentant racists thousands of miles away. The studio was outside of Boston, so about an hour and a half before the taping, I came downstairs to the lobby of the Bostonian Hotel, only to find myself face to face with the Ralstons, with whom I would be sharing the limo ride to the network affiliate. Despite knowing that they had left behind the white supremacist movement, I couldn't help but feel a momentary twinge of anxiety. These were, after all, people who just a year earlier would have wanted me dead. I nervously introduced myself and was immediately heartened by the warmth of the Ralston family. Jan was as sweet and kind as she could be, and Gary, though gruff, was also polite and probably just as nervous as I was, in case, wondering to what extent I was judging him and his family. With Jan and Gary were their two sons, Stephen, who had been forced to join the Klan by his dad, and Alan, who had refused to join and had been initially disowned by his parents after telling them he was gay. On the ride to the studio, we talked about their story, which, as it turns out, was far deeper than I had known. Not only had the family disowned Alan, but Gary had actually been plotting with some of his Klan brothers to murder his son after learning about his sexuality. In part, it was Jan's horror at realizing that her husband was planning to kill her flesh and blood that had begun to snap her out of the white supremacist coma into which she and the family had fallen 3 years earlier. At one point, as Alan was planning on coming home to Stone Mountain, Georgia for a visit, Jan had pleaded with him to stay in Texas for fear that had he returned home, Gary and other Klansmen would have murdered him. The show went well as the Ralstons and I effectively dismantled the incoherent ramblings of Ken and Carol Peterson, or really just Ken, since he rarely allowed his wife to speak. After returning to the Bostonian, we sat in the hotel for 2 hours discussing how they had come to join the Klan, how they had come to realize the error of their ways, and how they were committed to making it right by speaking out against racism. I told them about my life as well, after which point Jan said I was one of the first Jewish people she had ever really talked to at length, and how she was sorry about all the things she had said and felt about Jewish people in the past. I quickly forgave her, of course, thanked them for their courage, and as night became morning, we all said our goodbyes and went off to bed. I didn't sleep. Putting aside the exhilaration at having been on my first national television show and having solidly represented the anti-racist perspective, I was more excited by what I had come to realize. Sitting in that limo with the Ralstons, or later having beers with them and discussing race, what I had learned was the fundamental redeemability of even the most distorted human soul. Staring at these folks, looking deeply into their eyes, and witnessing the pain only barely concealed behind them, I had come to know that although David Duke had not changed, those who thought as he did were capable of transformation, that even the most vicious of racists is damaged before ever joining such a movement, and even more once there. And if people such as that can be redeemed, then perhaps anything is possible, even justice and the end of white supremacy altogether. Now, we're going on to the last section for the day, but he says something very key there. The fact that this man who had been a Klansman was willing to join with other Klansmen and murder his own son. Now, and I'm probably going to do a separate teaching on this about the history of the Ku Klux Klan and its tie to the presidency, and why the Klan will probably never be identified as a terrorist organization. We know it's identified as a hate group. We know it's identified as, a white supremacist organization. But there are reasons why the Klan will never, probably in our lifetime, be identified as a terrorist organization. There are reasons why. And so, you know, when you see things like this, or you hear about quote unquote Klan involvement, even in past history, and you're wondering, why aren't these people being brought to justice? There's plenty of, you know, facial recognition software now that you can look at some of these pictures and the people's faces are right there. It's not like they can't be identified. Why aren't they being identified? Why are these people being allowed to hold public offices and make decisions in states that, you know, over people's lives that they don't even like? Why is this possible? Why is it that the Klan has yet to be officially recognized as a terrorist organization? They have committed enough terrorist acts, burning down churches, bombing churches, burning down homes, bombing homes. And I'm talking specifically about the Klan. So you have to understand the history of the Klan in America and its ties to the presidency to understand why they will probably never be deemed a terrorist organization. You probably have to arrest some of the members of Congress. You probably have to arrest some police chiefs, people that are supposed to be upholding the law. So as he says here, you know, that what he saw in that experience was that anything is possible, that yes, they are capable of transformation, but it takes breaking down the doctrines that they have been taught. And as he said here, you had one parent, excuse me, who forced his child to join the KKK, the organization. So if you're forcing your children to join it, or you are as the leader of one of the major alt-right organizations, had raised his son up in this ideology and was training him to be the next generation. And it wasn't until his son went off to college and started learning about the history of the country and started learning about the plight of other people that he actually denounced becoming the next generation. Is going to take education, is going to take God, is going to take patience. But as he says here, they can be redeemed, they can be transformed. We know not everybody will, but you know, I'm a person that's optimistic enough to believe that some of them can be transformed. Maybe not all, but I think a lot of it does have to do with ignorance and not knowing. Only being raised in what you see and hear around you is a big part of why this stuff continues. It's a big part of why we have a whole nother generation of young people that don't know their history. And when I say don't know their history, I'm not just talking about they don't know the history of the United States, but they don't know the history of other people in this country and how they came to be here, because they've been given a whitewashed version of their history. And when you've been given a whitewashed version of your history, this is how you can come out thinking that America has done no wrong, that America does not need to repent from previous actions, right? So let's read on to our last section for today. Though it had been nice to be on TV, the appearance still hadn't opened the floodgates when it came to job offers. To make ends meet, I started working in the stockroom of the Bombay County furniture store where Nicole was manager. Then in August, Nicole somehow managed to wrangle a decorator's contract to design the VIP suites at the Republican National Convention, which was being held in Houston that year, as well as the official Bush family residence. The residence, as it happens, was just a hollowed out game room at the Houstonian Hotel. The Bush's family permanent Houston address so they could avoid paying income taxes in Maine, where they actually lived when not at the White House. Not having other work, I was immediately drafted into her decorator's army for the GOP shindig. Though I dreaded being that close to so many Republicans, especially so many of Pat Buchanan supporters, I thought it might be a good opportunity to do some enemy reconnaissance and to peek behind the curtains of the right-wing machine that was gearing up to take on Bill Clinton in November. To a large extent, it wouldn't be necessary to peek behind any curtains, as much as the extremist lunacy present at the convention will receive ample coverage in the press. On opening night, Pat Buchanan delivered his famous culture war speech, in which he raised the specter of the LA riots, repeating in utter fabrication that the rioters had been prepared to attack an old folks' home until brave soldiers stopped them, and then noting that just as the soldiers had reclaimed Los Angeles block by block, so too must conservative Christians take back their country block by block from the un-American pornographers, feminists, and homosexuals who were seeking to hijack it. Referring to Democrats as cross-dressers, Buchanan suggested that if elected, Bill and Hillary Clinton would usher in an era where children would be encouraged to sue their parents and the institution of marriage would be utterly eviscerated by militant lesbians and Hillary herself. I was in the convention hall that night bringing furniture to the VIP rooms and was reminded of nothing so much as the old footage of rallies at Nuremberg 60 years prior, led by a certain German chancellor to whom Buchanan had once referred as an individual of great courage. Although the convention's hostility seemed mostly focused on the LGBT community, there was always room for a little racial anxiety too. So early on the first day of the convention, as delegates were beginning to arrive, I happened to look out at the mostly empty floor of the convention space to the jumbotrons overhead that would soon show up-close coverage of the event. There in full-screen color, snarling out over the hall as if to remind those entering who the enemy was a freeze-frame image of the rapper Ice-T. The previous month, Ice had come under fire from law enforcement for the song Cop Killer, which appeared on the first album of his speed metal band, Body Count. The song, which told a story of revenge being taken on law enforcement because of police brutality, was seen by some as a call for murdering officers. Although no one really believed Johnny Cash had wanted to kill a man in Reno just to watch him die, when violence fantasies are spun by Black men, naturally they are never just fictionalized accounts intended as art, but are to be viewed as ruminations on the inherent nature of the person singing them. And there was the big bad rapper, though Cop Killer was not a rap song, scaring the Republican faithful as they entered the Astrodome. Let it suffice to say, subtlety was not their strong suit. But the willingness of conservatives to exploit racial fears for the purpose of revving up the troops was hardly a revelation. It wasn't even remotely surprising. What was instructive, however, was coming to understand more viscerally than I had ever before just how much my white skin insulated me from harsh judgments or suspicions of others. After we were done with the rooms at the convention hall, Nicole and I headed over to the Houstonian, where we were to meet two of her Bombay Company colleagues, so as to begin setting up Barbara and George Bush's living room, from which place they would be interviewed throughout the convention by the networks. It was a hot and humid day, and we made the drive from one side of the town to the next, without air conditioning. By the time we arrived at the checkpoint for the hotel, which was set up near the road, just inside the driveway to the main building, we were more than a little ragged around the edges, covered in sweat and desperate to get out of the heat, despite the way we looked, and despite the way in which the car was stuffed with closed boxes, in which frankly could have been anything, weapons as easily as furniture. When security asked us why we were there, and we told them, they did nothing more than briefly glance through the back window and then wave us on. They did not ask for identification. or a contact number for the persons with whom Nicole had contracted for the job in the first place. Nothing. We proceeded to spend the next 4 hours setting up the room in which the President of the United States and First Lady would be staying throughout prime time convention hours. We arranged furniture from the hotel, brought in new furniture from outside, and did all of this with no oversight or security whatsoever. There were no cameras in the room, and we finished a mere 5 minutes before the Bushes were to enter, which is to say, there was no time for any security sweep once we had exited. Simply put, no one considered that perhaps they might want to check out who we were and what we were doing. Had we been black, security would never have been so sanguine. Had we appeared to be Arab, it is highly unlikely that our car and furniture boxes would have gone unchecked. But white 23-year-olds, what could there possibly be to worry about? The fact that I had been told 4 years before that I couldn't even ride in a campaign motorcade with Michael Dukakis because I couldn't pass a background check, the result of my already extant FBI file, didn't matter. They simply hadn't thought to do or ask or to do their homework. Fact is, had I been the least bit inclined to kill the president, he would have been dead, and Dan Quayle would have inherited the office. We could have planted a bomb in that room or climbed on one of the trees that sat not 30 feet from the room's large floor-to-ceiling windows and shot him. Of course, we would never have done such a thing, and not only because Dan Quayle would have inherited the office, but the sickening fact is we could have, because we're white and therefore presumed not to be dangerous. Wow. So, think about what he has said. Think about the implications of being able to be that close to the president, that close to his personal space, that close to setting up his space, and think about all of the attacks that we've had since then with less access than that. And he makes a very, very good point. This is our reading for today. We are stopping there. But he makes a very, very good point. He said they were white and therefore presumed not to be dangerous. I'm just going to stop right there because that's just something to think about. He covers the Rodney King incident and how one of the things he talks about is something we're seeing even now with this current presidential election, and that is the fact that riots, right, are often used in campaigns to really push racial fears. The fear that if we don't get control of the nation, or if we don't take back the nation, that, you know, terrible things are going to happen. Well, the reality is, for millions of Americans, terrible things are already happening. Terrible things are already happening. We look at what's happening in Flint with the water. We look at what's happening in Standing Rock, North Dakota, with the access pipelines and with the abuse of the water protectors because they don't call themselves protesters. So terrible things are already happening. Question is, who do we want in charge of our country while terrible things are happening? Who is going to stir up panic, riots, and chaos? And who is capable of keeping a level head while terrible things are happening? In just a few short days, matter of fact, in 6 days, we're going to find out who America, or rather, not who America, but rather who the Electoral College has chosen to be our next president. Well, that concludes our reading for today. We'll be back again tomorrow. I hope that you are having a great and wonderful Wednesday, Winsday. And I hope that you will join us again at 11 a.m. tomorrow, Eastern Standard Time. Take care and God bless. Again, thank you for viewing by live stream. I hope that you are having a great and wonderful day. Take care and God bless.